Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brady Wolken. I'm the Volunteer and Partnership Liaison for the Kansas Forest Service. Thank you for joining us on our first Community Forestry quarterly webinar. Today, we are going to hear from Kody. Kody was a arborist before joining, a commercial arborist before joining the Kansas Forest Service a couple years ago, and he's now our Southeast District Forester. Um, He's very knowledgeable with chainsaw, so he's going to be a very good speaker for this talk we have today during the lunch hour. Really quick, I want to give a quick shout out for our next quarterly webinar. It's going to be, let me find the date on that. It is going to be with our Northwest District Forester, Chelsea Hansen, and she's going to be talking about right tree, right place, and that'll be on November 10th, the same time from noon to 1. Couple other things before we get started here. We will have if you have a question during the Kody's talk, go ahead and put it in the chat, and then once Kody gets to the stopping point, I'll go ahead and ask Kody that question, and we'll get that answered while we go through the talk. And then another thing I wanted to mention was this talk, the link to it was on our KFS calendar on our website. You can find many other things like our book club and other things like that if you ever want to connect with us again. With that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Kody, and we will get started.
Thanks, Brady. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time out of your day. I know it's a hot day. Hopefully, you're in some air conditioning and enjoying a little break today. I will apologize if today's material is a review for anyone, but it's always good to have a gentle reminder now and again. And we're all in different stages here on our journey of learning. So today we're going to focus on fundamentals. And so if you're a little bit beyond this, I do apologize, but it's good to review fundamentals from time to time. Like Brady said, my background is in tree care, but in the last few years, I've been fortunate to take some chainsaw classes specific to wildland firefighting. The insights that I've gained from those classes have helped me to garner a better understanding of chainsaw safety and learn some skills from some very skillful sawyers. The fire service has some really top-notch sawyers. Stick around to the end. We'll have a link for ISA CEUs. And so if you're an ISA certified arborist, this our presentation should be good for one CEU. I would like to start off today with a story. And this is something that's really personal to me and a reason why I'm so passionate about the topic of chainsaw safety. But in 2002, I was new to the industry. So was my coworker, Cliff. We were working in Mound Ridge one day, and I was dragging brush, as you do a lot in the field of arboriculture. And it was my job to get all the material from the backyard to the front yard where we were going to run it through the chipper. And Cliff was in the backyard working. And on one of my trips, I noticed his saw wasn't running anymore. And he had taken his handkerchief out of his back pocket and applied pressure to the inside of his left arm. And when I came up to him, he was a little bit white in the face, but he was still plenty conscious and upright. And I asked him what was wrong, and he told me that he'd had an accident with the chainsaw. So without knowing anything else, we got him loaded up and took him to the local hospital. And he stayed conscious the whole time. He didn't lose a lot of blood, fortunately. And it wasn't until we were driving home that night after the hospital that I got to learn what happened. And the short version is that Cliff was using a top-handled saw, one-handed, cutting over his head, and had experienced kickback. And the chain had contacted the inside of his left elbow. And very, very lucky that he only had a few stitches and didn't sever his brachial artery, but he was within a couple centimeters of hitting that artery, and life would have been a lot crazier that day had he hit that artery. So one of those things that happened early on in my career and has really stayed with me for the last 24 years. Those are the sorts of things that we want to avoid, of course. And so if there's something that I can share today to help prevent situations like that, that's what this is all about, right? So we want everybody to get home safely at the end of the day. We want to create a culture of safety. Um, and to understand that accidents are oftentimes the result of a series of events, or a series of decisions that lead to a negative outcome. So I was on a safety committee for a while, and we spent a lot of time trying to get to the root cause of a lot of accidents. So we talk about engineering controls. Those can come through proper design, procedures, eliminating the potential for injury. But if we can create a safety culture, that's where we're all going to benefit and make sure that everybody gets home safe at the end of each day. So in the field of arboriculture, tree care, there are ANSI standards, and we often refer to ANSI Z133 as the safety requirements for arboriculture operations. There is a new edition that just came out this year. It is available for download. Digital copies are free through the ISA website, the International Society of Arboriculture. Hard copies are available at a cost of $24.95 for ISA members and $29.95 for non-members. In this booklet or this digital download, they use the two words should and shall. Should is basically a recommendation, and shall is a mandate. So using that terminology, I just want to do a little CYA moment here with a disclaimer that this safety related presentation today shall not supersede your employer policies, other national safety standards, manufacturers' recommendations. The purpose today is to provoke some discussion and for me to provide insights that will hopefully strengthen already existing safety culture in our industry. I can't offer you a credential, a certification, or a fancy piece of paper, but my goal is that everybody gets something out of this, even if it is just a review. And then we'll talk about chainsaws. They're pretty fun to talk about. There are many, many classes available if you're inspired to learn more. That S112 class was one that I took, I think, earlier this year through NWCG. Once again, those sawyers for wildland fire are well versed, and it's been really fun for me to kind of hitch along a ride with them. It's a different perspective for sure, but great sawyers and really good with a chainsaw in their hand. And then just a heads up here, we are not going to talk about chainsaw maintenance. That could be a whole nother class in itself. So we're just going to focus on safety aspects today. Number one, know your limits. If you consider the task at hand and then consider your own abilities, don't be afraid to ask for help. If you find out that if you want to knock down a tree and it's a very complex felling situation, be able to recognize that and be able to ask for help. There's going to be situations that I come up into that I say no to, and that's okay, right? It's not going to be everybody's wheelhouse every day. It's also important to get in the mindset not to rush. In the special forces of the U.S. military, they say slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So do not rush. Mindset is very important. Ultimately, you need to make that call of whether it's a go or a no-go for you. So, Brady, are we able to do that poll?
Yep, I will get that going.
Okay. So,
Um,
experience, yeah, experience helps us make good decisions, but it can also lead to complacency. So, think about your place on this continuum here, and we'll talk about how often you've used a chainsaw in the past.
yeah, and you guys should all see that QR the poll go up on your guys' screen. I'm already seeing quite a few responses here. Um, we'll give it about another 30 seconds, and then we will I'll show the results to everyone. And then we can go ahead and chat about that. Okay, it looks like everyone's answered, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. Kody, can you go ahead and see the results that I put up on the screen?
I can.
Okay.
So, so we have fairly balanced, We have somebody that has probably used a chainsaw over 1,000 times, quite an experienced sawyer. Another that's right up there, probably over 100 times. Someone that's never used a chainsaw before, and then someone probably in that 10 to 100. Okay. Brady, I can't advance until that one's done.
Yep, I just stopped sharing it. You should be able
Perfect.
to click on
Perfect.
that.
So the good thing is if you've never used a chainsaw before, you don't have any bad habits. You don't have any good habits either, but at least you don't have any bad habits, right? And that's a good place to start. Conversely, for those folks that have used the chainsaw over 1,000 times, you have habits. They might be good, they might be bad, and maybe you've never really thought about that before. But um, if you haven't thought about it before, maybe today's a good start to it. You have habits. They're hard to change. Originally, chainsaws were invented to cut bone. In 1830, Bernhard Hein, a German physician, invented this device with a hand crank consisting of a chain with cutting teeth that revolved around a guide bar. He called it the osteotome, a bone saw. Interestingly enough, we still define a chainsaw as a tool that consists of a cutting chain that revolves around a guide bar. So pretty interesting stuff, what the original chainsaw was intended for. Um, it evolved, right? We realized that this kind of rotating cutting tooth around a guide bar worked really good for cutting wood, right? So in 120 years after the original chainsaw, we were using it in the woods. 1957 McCulloch number 35 there. Quite the piece of machinery. I'm glad I don't have to use that. It's probably weighs about half of what I do. But now in our modern era, we have an arms race between Husqvarna and Steel and all the other companies that are making high-tech tools. And it's good for us, right? As end users. Um, my point here is that chainsaws have evolved to be awesome machines with awesome potential. It could be good, it could be bad. They don't care what they cut. Speaking of cuts, yeah, I understand this is a lunch hour, and if you're eating your lunch, I apologize. I'm going to give you an opportunity to turn away. There are going to be some gross, uh, disgusting slides here. So if blood and guts bother you, you'll have a warning here in a sec. But chainsaw injuries aren't so much cuts, um, in the sense of what a knife does. It's more like picturing each tooth as a chisel, which is what it really is. And so it's tearing and gouging at thousands of RPMs. So it does not bode well for the human body. The average number of stitches that result from a chainsaw injury is 110. That's average. So you can imagine on the high side, several hundred stitches. Not a happy sight. Uh, don't get too hung up on this slide. My point here is that feet, legs, and hands are the body parts most frequently injured by chainsaws. It's our extremities. Okay, so here's your warning. If you're eating lunch and or don't like gory images, please look away. I will give you a heads up when we're done with these nasty, gruesome photos. Okay, so that's your warning. So my question here with this foot slash toe injury is could this have happened um, in a saw starting situation? If someone was drop starting the saw without the chain brake activated, um, could this have been a result of that? I'm not sure. It could have also happened as a result of follow through, and we'll talk about that. Um, when you cut through the intentional object, cut through the log, and if you cut through too fast, then that chain drops. Maybe this was a result of that either. At any rate, I doubt this person was wearing the proper footwear. Maybe they were, and it cut through leather and then got to their skin. I don't know the history of this photo, but not pretty. If you look close, you can actually see at the top of the toe where the cutting teeth, separate cutting teeth, hit the skin. So this case study, I believe, came out of the UK, and interestingly enough, um, the image didn't get reversed. This is someone's right hand, and it's odd. Most hand arm extremity injuries are happening to the left hand, and we'll talk more about that and why. But this individual admitted that they used a top-handled chainsaw one-handed with their left hand, and this was the result that day. This one is a much newer case study that I discovered here just within the last couple of months. This injury happened to an experienced sawyer who was actually demonstrating saw operations during a wildland fire training. So a few factors here, probably a little bit of complacency. This was a kickback scenario. The cutting situation was fairly complex. There was a slope at the base of the tree, and in order to reach the cutting height to fell this tree, the sawyer had to raise the saw up quite a bit higher than they would have liked to. Kickback occurred, and the saw chain contacted their left shoulder. The crazy thing about this is that there was a video that accompanied it, and it was crazy how fast the kickback happened. The inertia activated chain brake did not engage. If it did, it didn't happen in time. And it led to some pretty interesting expert dialogue here. And there were people saying that an inertia activated chain brake may only work about half of the time. And I would say 50-50 chances are not good, right? So the reality here is we can't rely on inertia activated chain brakes to keep us safe. This Sawyer also admitted that their preference is to have low rakers or depth gauges, so they had them filed down quite a bit for an aggressive cutting chain. That can also contribute to heightened kickback potential. Okay, so a lot of factors went into this one, but pretty gruesome injury. And then this image, I don't know. The more I look at it, the more I'm suspicious that it's AI. And Brady, you can probably laugh at me. We were talking about people of my generation and technology, and when do you recognize if something's AI or not? But my take home with this one is that it is the left hand, which is the most common place to one of the more common places to have a chainsaw injury, sadly. And left-handed injuries, um, actually, anyway, any injury to a hand, the only way that that can happen is if you take a hand off the saw. So one-handed operation is inherently dangerous. We know that. All right, for those of you that looked away, it's safe to join us again. I promise no more blood and guts, okay? Let's talk a little bit about chainsaw work preparedness. It's good to have a JSA or a JHA. In the ANSI Z133, they refer to a job briefing with quote unquote available information on the known hazards pertaining to each job. Know where you're working, be able to describe geographical details. Know if you're going to be taking somebody in and not waiting for an ambulance, know where you're going to be headed. Have an appropriate first aid kit nearby. Appropriate. You may need blood stop. You may need a tourniquet. So the first aid kit that you buy at Walmart probably isn't going to be appropriate for chainsaw work. Have someone in the crew that is delegated to call 911 before you even start. Have that in your job briefing. Who's going to call 911? And then know within your crew who has the proper training to help in a first response situation. If you must work alone, use a check-in. If somebody can call or text you every 15 minutes, every 20 minutes, every half hour, some agreed upon time frame so that you can safely work and check in with a friend. But if at all possible, avoid working alone. There's many different fact sheets and safety recommendations that you can seek out. And this happens to be one that is an OSHA handout. You see things like this in break rooms in all across the United States. Another good resource is your saw's manual. If you got a saw secondhand, you can probably find the manual online somewhere. But each saw will have its own specific set of safety features and starting procedures that are worth knowing. Safety features that we should be familiar with on a modern chainsaw. That inertia activated chain brake. As I mentioned, it doesn't work quick enough. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but it is a nice feature to have. Spring-loaded system where if kickback occurs, it's going to stop that clutch and stop that chain from turning. Throttle interlocks, I know we sometimes complain about them. Some of them aren't the most ergonomic or user-friendly, but they don't allow you to engage the throttle unless you're gripping that rear handle. Chain catcher, it may only work once and need to be replaced, but make sure your chain or your chainsaw has a working chain catcher. A lot of them are aluminum, some of them are plastic, but it's going to keep that chain from getting too far off the bar if you do happen to throw your chain. Anti-vibration, I consider that a safety feature. When we think about long-term use of a chainsaw, anti-vibration systems are very, very nice for the end user. Ergonomic designs, just how our hands fit on a handle, how we interact with that chainsaw is with our human bodies They just keep getting better and better, and I'm here for it, right? And then chain design actually can incorporate some kickback reduction in how those chains are manufactured. So we may not like it because it may take away some of that aggressive cutting, but for a homeowner to have a reduced kickback chain, that's a good thing. And then in the world of wildland fire, it's really good to make sure your spark arrestor is working properly, is not plugged up with carbon, and it's something to check. So if you aren't aware of what some of these features are on your saw, I would highly encourage you to look through your saw manual and get to know your saw a little bit better and be aware of all of these things. If there are design features of your saw that are missing or broken, take your saw out of service until it is fixed. Okay. I know we don't want to lose productivity, but for the sake of your safety and everyone's safety, take it out of service. If it's a shared piece of equipment, which is often the case with a municipality or a tree care crew, different people are using the same saw. They may not know what they're looking for. And if you see something wrong with the saw, it's best practice to take it out of service. Also, my one tip of chainsaw maintenance is take the time to sharpen or replace your chain. It will be well worth the time investment. Sharp chains are actually safer to use and more efficient than dull chains. So try to keep your chain sharp. Let's talk a little bit about chainsaw reactive forces. There are three. They are push, pull, and kickback. We'll talk a little bit about each one. So the first one, push, as that chain is moving around, it'd be the small arrows moving in that direction. And if we think about that in tens of thousands revolutions per minute, there's a lot of forces acting upon that system. And push occurs when you're using the top part of the bar, and it's just the reactive force that pushes the power head back towards you. So the power head's going to be back over to the left part of the slide. And push is just what you experience when you're cutting with the top of the bar and experience that cutting head or that power head coming back towards you. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just something to be aware of. We don't often think about it, but it's one of the three reactive forces when using a chainsaw. Pull is probably more common. Seems like most people use the bottom part of their bar. There's nothing wrong with using the top part of your bar, but if you use the bottom part of the bar, and once again, that chain is rotating this way, it's going to want to pull the power head away from you. And that can be a good thing, right? You can get the saw dogs in contact with the log that you're cutting, and it's a nice stable way to cut. The third one, and the one that's most dangerous and the one that we'll probably spend a little bit more time talking about, is kickback. And so if you think about, once again, the direction that that chain is moving, and you encounter the top bar tip and nothing else, because of the crazy fast speeds of the chain, you're going to experience a force that wants to kick the tip of the bar up. And that's, when we can potentially have some safety concerns is when kickback happens. And we're talking tiny, tiny fractions of a second. And if we're not prepared for it, if we don't have a good body positioning, this is when a lot of accidents can occur. Once again, this is a little diagram of that danger part of the cutting tip. We don't want to initiate any cuts with the top part of the bar tip. We're better off starting a cut with this portion of the chain rather than the portion up here. There's a YouTube video here. There's plenty of YouTube videos out there that demonstrate kickback, and we'll skip that for today, but just know that you can find lots of YouTube videos on what kickback is. Let's talk a little bit about PPE. We need to have hearing protection. We need to have a hard hat. We need to have leather boots, eye protection, and chaps or chainsaw protective pants. Funny enough, gloves are not mentioned, at least when I read through the latest digital download of the ANSI standards. Gloves were not mentioned in the field of arboriculture. And I know a lot of arborists that don't wear gloves, and that's okay. I would say for most homeowners, it's a really good idea. It's not going to probably protect you from a chainsaw cut, but it is going to protect you from all those other scrapes and knocks that happen pretty common when we're in the woods. So I would advocate for gloves. Now, if they're leather gloves and they create a slick surface for you to grip, maybe they're not the best for a chainsaw, right? So think about what kind of surface or what kind of material your gloves are made of. Long sleeves, also not a requirement. And then depending on what kind of shirt has the long sleeves, it's probably more dangerous to have a long sleeve flannel. And if those cuffs come unbuttoned, then you've got material flapping around close to a chainsaw. So um, think about the types of sleeves that you have on. You wouldn't want loose sleeves or sleeves that could come unbuttoned and become a hazard. And then talking about hard hats, having a brim is the best policy in case the worst were to happen and you experience kickback. That brim's going to protect your face. But I also don't want to see somebody wearing a hard hat that's 15, 20 years old. So we don't often talk about it, but think about how old your hard hat is. There are expirations that go with all of these pieces of PPE. And so think about that. Know when to retire your PPE. A little bit about chaps and pants. All these chainsaw protective clothing that's now available to us, they don't actually protect against a cutting tooth, but they're designed to jam they're designed to jam the chain and the drive mechanism. So it's going to stop the chain from spinning altogether. It's not going to prevent an abrasion cut. So there are some fibers in all of these materials that are going to quickly get drawn into the saw's drive system and jam up that clutch. I also
Kody,
like,
really quick,
yeah, yeah.
could you explain and go into a little bit more detail how a hard hat or chaps would expire, or like what happens when they hit that manufacturer date of like you should probably replace these, just to give a little more detail on that?
Sure. So it varies based on the manufacturer. Once again, look at your manuals that come with your tools and your PPE. Some hard hats might have a 5 year 5 year life expectancy. Others might go 10. And so knowing just the specifics of what you buy can make a big difference. It's not the same across the board, but in general, plastic's going to degrade from UV damage over time, and then you know, you might you if you ever have contact with your chainsaw and your chaps or your chainsaw protective pants, they need to be retired immediately. So that's only one time if you have an accident and those chaps get struck immediately. They're supposed to be taken out of service. Um, and dirty chaps don't function as well as clean chaps. So take the time to have those laundered. If you, I joke with people, but I've seen people wearing chaps that have no idea what the original color was. I knew for a fact, well, they're steel chaps, so they probably started out as orange, but 5 years down the road, they've gotten quite dirty. And so um, I don't know that everybody is aware of how important it is to keep those laundered. So um, make sure I covered everything here. Yeah, I think so. Brady, thanks for that question, though. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Let's talk a little bit about safe starting procedures. And this is one of those things where um, if you haven't been shown this before, you just don't know any better. And there's really only two procedures that are safe. Drop starting is not one of them. So drop starting is when you have the pull cord in one hand and you actually allow that power head to move down. And it does, it makes life easier. But with modern saws, they start a lot easier. You can reduce compression and and start a saw a lot easier than you probably could 20 years ago. So drop starting is not an accepted safe starting procedure. Um, Make sure that you have the chain brake engaged before starting, and that's going to be pushed forward. You'll have the chain brake on. It's always a good idea to say something like, "Hey, saw's coming on," or chainsaw starting, or something like that, just to communicate with anybody that's potentially nearby, just so they know and aren't surprised and can stay away. Maintain strong body position with good posture. And then your two options are either the leg lock, which is being demonstrated here in this photo, or to have the saw down on the ground. That's it, either the leg lock or on the ground. And then once again, I'll refer to manufacturers' manuals. Follow those manuals for that specific saw, because there's variability between manufacturers, between models within the same manufacturer. So um, it's a good idea to read up about it before you use it. If we think about how chainsaws are designed, they are not symmetrical. That bar is off to the right side. And because of that, we can use those designs to our advantage in a safety sense. We can keep our feet, legs, and torso to the left of the bar and chain. And that way, if we do experience kickback or follow through, we're out of the rest of our body is out of the potential path of that chain. More about proper technique. And once again, think about this the next time you're using your saw, and maybe critique yourself. Because if we have habits from thousands of times of using a saw, um, we're just doing it. We're not thinking about it anymore. It's muscle memory. And so think about some of these things. We need to keep both hands on the saw. We need to wrap our thumbs for a powerful grip. We need to have our right hand on the throttle and our left hand on the forward handle. Notice the grip here. The thumb is underneath and the thumb is wrapped around with both hands. It says in the ANSI standards that no part of the chainsaw should be above shoulder height. So we shouldn't be doing any overhead cutting. We need to maintain a stable stance, like an athletic position that we might have been told about back in PE or in sports in school. And then once again, be aware of where your leg and body are, and try to be on the left side of where that chain could kick back or follow through. It wasn't until I started taking some chainsaw safety classes with the wildland fire folks within the Kansas Forest Service. I learned of the term blood bubble, and that concept was first described to me, I think, in the S-112 class. But in the fire program, a lot of times they'll have a two-person team, the sawyer and the swamper. And the sawyer is the one doing the cutting, and the swamper is the person clearing away the cut material. So there needs to be some nonverbal communication between those two, eye contact, hand signals, something like that, so that the swamper only approaches when it is safe to do so. So that blood bubble describes the minimum distance to keep away from the saw operator while the saw is running. So there's a certain radius that you need to stay away. We call that the blood bubble. Pretty graphic term. Once you hear it and learn it, it's not one of those that you forget. And then be aware of potential energy. And if you're on a slope, especially, we need to be aware of things that could roll. And then what we're cutting, it could undergo compression, torsion, tension. These are all things to consider when we're making a cut. And then this is another one that a lot of homeowners don't understand, but in that ANSI book, the Z133, if you're not actively cutting, that chain brake needs to be on and engaged. So it's best practice to have that chain brake engaged. So if you've never activated, if you've never just on off, just practice that before, get in the habit of activating that chain brake whenever you're not cutting. And I mentioned muscle memory before. That's something that you can do and you can practice when the saw's not running. Your left hand does not have to leave that forward handle. You can just use the top of your hand to push the chain brake and activate that. And then you can leave your thumb wrapped around that front handle and then just use your fingers to pull that back and to disengage the chain brake before you're ready to cut. Does that make sense, Brady?
Yep. Yep.
Another thing to consider with proper technique is to know where the bar tip is, with the danger of kickback um, happening there at the top part of the bar tip. Even if you can't see it, even if that view is obstructed by the sawyer, by the log that you're cutting, know where that bar tip is so that you can lessen the likelihood of experiencing kickback. Here's another view showing a proper grip. We have a nice wrap here. The thumb is on the opposite side of the fingers, and then on the throttle handle, the rear handle, we're also wrapping that right thumb. That's the strongest grip that you can have. Think about if trying to hold on to something in your hand and somebody's trying to take it away from you, you're going to wrap your thumb for the strongest grip. This will demonstrate a little bit what you do to put the chain brake on and take the chain brake off. Once again, your thumb doesn't leave the handle. And this is a great muscle memory thing to practice. If you're going to run a saw for hours at a time and you're doing it safely, that chain brake is going to go on and off dozens or hundreds of times in that hour. Every time you take a step away, every time you're not cutting, the chain brake goes on. It's not until you're in position to make the cut that you take the chain brake off. So we talk about technique, but our brain is a pretty big tool, and so we need to have the proper mindset when we're operating something like a chainsaw. I would argue that you should have total focus on the task at hand when you're operating a chainsaw. There are many examples, both physical and mental, that can lead to accidents. These distractions that are all too common in our modern world. Examples of mental distractions. Could be finances at home. It could be finances on the job site. If you're uh, the owner of a tree care company and you bid a job and you thought the job might only take 3 hours and you're still there 6 hours later, you might be thinking about finances on the job site, right? You might also be thinking about a past argument or a disagreement with someone that we care about, and that past argument's living rent free in our consciousness. That's a mental distraction, right? So we're constantly bombarded by things like that in our lives, and we need to remember to focus on the task at hand when we have a dangerous tool in our hand. Examples of physical distractions on a day like today, it could be 105 degrees, or at least the heat index could be. We could have sweat dripping. We could have our our third t-shirt of the day has been soaked with sweat, right? By the time we're done with a job. So lots of potential physical distractions. What if you're working next to a busy street and a really beautiful person drives by in a really beautiful vehicle? there's there's a physical distraction, right? So there's just all kinds of things that could potentially distract you from total focus. My my goal whenever I run a saw is to try to approach that flow state. And if you ever see an interview with a retired athlete and they're replaying all of their highlights and their famous moments from big games. They talk about what it was like to be in the moment. They had great situational awareness, right? They knew what was going on around them, but they were in a flow state. And they'll tell you that time slows down. All that really mattered was just what was at their fingertips, right? So I think that's a good goal when we're operating a chainsaw. Talk just a little bit about this. This is another topic that could be several hours long, but be thinking about what you're cutting and the potential forces that are on hand there. We have tension, compression. We could also have torsion. And so, I'll be the first to admit it's really embarrassing when you get your chainsaw stuck in a cut when you're on that compression side and your chain won't turn and your bar's stuck in the cut. The first thing you do is you look around and wonder who saw you do it, you know. It's a slice of humble pie for sure. So it, there aren't too many people that have used the chainsaw that hasn't happened to, because it can sneak up on you in a hurry. But those are the sorts of things that we want to avoid. So consider those forces. I want to talk very briefly about the difference between a top handle chainsaw and a rear handle chainsaw. Um, the top handle chainsaw is designed to be used aloft. That's what it's designed for. Now, that doesn't keep my 85-year-old next door neighbor from going down to Ace Hardware and purchasing one, because it's nice and light and it has a good power to weight ratio. Um, but it scares me to death when people that don't understand the difference between a top handle and a rear handle go for that top handle saw. So for me, it's important to explain the kickback potential of rear handled saws is less than top handled saws. And it's tempting to want to use a top handled saw one handed. It just is. For me, I would want to train a new sawyer with a rear handled saw. Uh, the kickback potential is less. And if we think about um, Oh, if we think like a wheelbase on a car, longer is more stable. And spaced leverage where we have our hands on a rear-handled saw, um, our hands are spaced further apart, and that gives us more control. And in the event of kickback, it gives us a little bit more leverage to combat that force. Okay. And once again, you're just not tempted to use a rear-handled saw one-handed the way you might be with a top-handled saw. We could have that debate, what's better, gas versus battery. To me, it comes down to what your task is and just using the right tool for the job. I really love a couple of my battery saws. It's really nice if you're up in a tree not to have to pull start. Um, but there's some potentially negative things here. If I have pros in green and cons in red. If I don't use my large 24-inch bar saw very often, that fuel could go bad. Uh, the negatives that oftentimes come up on battery saws is that you need to have extra batteries and or a charger on hand on the work site. And then it's easy to forget bar oil. Usually you fill up bar oil on your saw when you fill up the gas. So if you run out of gas, you fill up the gas and then you fill up the bar oil. Well, if you aren't filling up the gas or topping off the gas, you could potentially forget to top off the bar oil. So I just like having more options to have the best tool for the job. So it's pretty neat to have battery power. Touch a little bit on chainsaws on a stick, a powered pull pruner. Um, you need the same PPE. Okay, that is still a chainsaw. There's some really cool new stuff here that Milwaukee has available, that are like loppers. So it's nice for making small cuts, better for pruning, I would argue. Um, it seems to be human nature that if we have a 12-foot reach, that limb is 13 feet in the air. And so we get right underneath it and things can fall on us. So pretty good reminder, don't stand directly underneath the branch that you're going to cut. The PPE requirements are the same as any chainsaw if you're using one of these. Okay. This is, this is how you avoid having to put a typical chainsaw above shoulder height, is to have the right tool for the job. I want to touch just briefly on fuel geysers. This is something that I didn't learn about in the field of arboriculture. It wasn't until uh, wild and fire training that I was introduced to a fuel geyser. And so never align your face and body directly in the path of an opening fuel cap. So pressure can develop in that fuel tank and result in a spray of hot fuel. So always point the fuel cap away from you when you're breaking the seal. In tree care, and always, we want to avoid having that fuel and that spray on our clothing and bodies. But it's a much higher, the stakes are much higher in wildland fire if there's a fuel geyser, as you're in proximity to open flames or heat sources. Um, there are some videos out there, and they interview. I saw a really poignant interview with a young man that was um, I think he was on a wildland firefighting crew. He was actually a hot shot, I think, and he suffered second and third degree burns as a result of a fuel geyser. So something that's important to touch on in chainsaw safety. So we're nearing the end here. I just wanted to revisit this story with Cliff. If you guys can catch some of the things that might have happened on that day, if you want to drop answers in the chat, um, what are some of those things that Cliff did wrong? Um, you know, it is something that I'm never going to forget about. And if I can prevent injuries like that happening to some of my friends and colleagues and people in the public, then that's my goal, right? We want to get everybody home safe at the end of the day. Ultimately, just there as a reminder, some of the things he might have done, he used the top handled saw one-handed. He had the chainsaw above shoulder height. He lost track of where the bar tip was. There was probably a component of complacency involved as well. So, these are some of my favorite follows on Instagram. These guys are amazing, and this lady, these people are amazing, great resources, just tremendous sawyers. Some of these other websites here, great resources there. Husqvarna website, the Steel website, ISA. Find opportunities to learn. There's wildland fire training available on our KFS website. You can look at the calendar and check out new learning opportunities. TCIA has great resources as well. Reach out to me. Keep learning, be safe. Here's my contact information. I'd love to hear from you. And then if you are an ISA certified arborist, you can scan this QR code and put in your information and get a CEU.
Yeah. Thanks, Kody. Does anyone have any questions? It looks like we've got about 3 minutes before we're done with our talk today. Does anyone have any pressing questions that either came up during Kody's talk or just about chainsaw safety in general? Kody, it seems like you did a great job. We're not getting any questions.
Either that or everybody fell asleep.
I don't think that part.
I have the voice of a Muppet and the face for radio. So this is probably not the best interaction I could have with people, but we're trying here.
Oh no, it was fantastic. Looks like we got someone in the chat saying thank you for doing these. And another person saying they learned so much. Okay. Well, if there's not anything else, I think we'll go ahead and end about 2 minutes early. We really do appreciate you guys joining us on here in Kansas. It's lunchtime, but depending where you're joining from, we really thank you guys for joining. And then um, we will have our next one in, I think I said November at the beginning, for Right Tree, Right Place. And yeah, that will be on our website as well. It'll go out to our Between the Branches newsletter as well. Okie dokie. Thank you for everyone joining us. And we'll see you later.